I woke up Thursday morning to find a construction crew tearing up my front lawn in Phoenix, Arizona, and nobody had bothered to tell me a damn thing about it. I stumbled outside in my bathrobe with my coffee still steaming, watching three guys in hard hats dig massive holes right next to my Japanese maple tree. The one I'd planted when my daughter was born, the one that had taken 7 years to look this good in the desert heat. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging down my driveway. "What the hell are you doing to my property?" The guy running the excavator killed the engine and pulled out some folded papers. "You Adam O'Brien?" "Yeah, that's me. We're installing the new community mailbox cluster. Should have gotten notice from your HOA about 2 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. "This is my front yard, my property. You can't just dig it up." He shrugged and handed me the papers. "Take it up with your HOA, buddy. We're just following the work order. Says right here, 2847 Sagaro Drive. Install centralized mail facility per USP's regulations and HOA board approval." I scanned the documents, my blood pressure rising with each word. Sure enough, there was my address. But I'd never received any notice, any letter, any heads-up whatsoever. The paperwork showed approval from someone named Brenda Jennings, HOA president, and the decision had apparently been made at a board meeting I knew nothing about. "You need to stop right now," I said. "I never approved this." The foreman, a weathered guy with sun damage covering his neck, shook his head. "Can't do that, sir. We've got a contract. You'll have to sort it out with the HOA. We stop now, you'll be charged for the delay." "Charged? This is my property." "According to this," he tapped the papers, "your HOA has easement rights for community improvements. You signed that when you bought the house." I wanted to throw my coffee mug at something. Instead, I stormed back inside and pulled out my HOA documents from the filing cabinet. It took me 20 minutes of reading through legal jargon before I found it. Buried on page 47 of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, there was indeed language about easement rights for community postal facilities and utilities. But there were also clear provisions requiring 30-day notice to affected homeowners and an opportunity to appeal. I'd gotten nothing. Zero communication. By the time I'd showered and dressed, they'd already poured concrete footings. I took pictures of everything: the destroyed grass, the damaged tree roots, the workers, their truck with the company name plastered on the side. Then I got in my car and drove straight to Brenda Jennings' house. I knew where she lived because everyone in Sunset Ridge Estates knew where Brenda lived. She'd been HOA president for 6 years, running unopposed because nobody else wanted to deal with the headache. Her house sat at the corner of Desert Rose and Canyon View, a sprawling 2-story Mediterranean-style place with a fountain in the front yard and enough decorative rocks to landscape a small golf course. I rang the doorbell 3 times before she answered. Brenda Jennings looked exactly like you'd imagine an HOA president named Brenda to look. 50-something, short blonde hair styled with enough hairspray to survive a hurricane, yoga pants despite probably never doing yoga, and a phone perpetually attached to her hand. She opened the door with an expression that suggested I'd interrupted something terribly important, probably a Facebook argument. "Adam, what can I do for you?" Her voice had that fake sweetness that made my teeth hurt. "You can explain why there's a construction crew destroying my front yard without my permission." She blinked slowly, like I was speaking a foreign language. "The mailbox cluster. That was approved by the board 3 months ago. Everyone was notified. I wasn't notified of anything. We sent letters to all affected properties. I never got one." Brenda sighed, the kind of sigh that implied this was my fault somehow. "Well, that's a postal service issue then, isn't it? Regardless, the decision has been made." The old neighborhood mailboxes were vandalized last month, and USPs informed us they need to be consolidated to a single location for security purposes. Your property was selected because it's centrally located. So you decided to put it on my lawn. There's a community park 2 blocks away. The park is county property. We'd need permits and it would take months. Your location is perfect. The easement clause allows us to do this. The easement clause also requires 30 days notice and an appeal process. Her expression tightened. The notice was sent. Then show me proof. Show me the certified mail receipt. I don't have to show you anything, Adam. The board voted and the decision is final. I suggest you go home and let the workers finish their job. The sooner you cooperate, the sooner it'll be done. This isn't over, Brenda. Yes, it is. She closed the door in my face. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to figure out my next move. I could call a lawyer, but that would cost thousands I didn't have. I could file a complaint with the HOA board, but Brenda controlled the board. I could go to the county, but property disputes took forever to resolve. Or I could handle this myself. The idea hit me as I drove past the community park on my way home. It was beautiful, simple, and absolutely insane. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Brenda wanted to use easement rights to put something on my property without my real consent. Fine. I'd use that same logic right back at her. When I got home, the construction crew was packing up for lunch. The mailbox cluster was halfway installed. A massive metal structure with slots for about 30 houses, sitting right in the middle of what used to be my best landscaping. It looked industrial and ugly, completely out of place in a residential neighborhood. I walked around it, taking more pictures, measuring dimensions. The thing was big, maybe 8 feet wide and 6 feet tall, mounted on a concrete pad about 10 feet square. Heavy, but not immovable. Not with the right equipment. I went inside and made some calls. My buddy Derek owned a landscaping company. We'd gone to Arizona State together, and I'd helped him move 4 times over the years. He owed me favors. "You want to do what?" Derek said when I explained my plan. "Move it. Tonight. After the HOA inspection is done, but before USPS officially approves it." "Adam, that's insane. That's probably illegal." "So is building on my property without proper notice." I checked the CC and Articus again. The easement requires good faith compliance with notice requirements. They didn't provide notice, so the easement is invalid. I'm just relocating community property to a more appropriate location. The HOA president's front yard. She said the board made this decision. She should be proud to host the results. Derek laughed, the kind of laugh that meant he thought I'd lost my mind but was curious enough to watch it play out. "When?" 2 in the morning, Sunday. "I'll pay you $2,000 cash. Make it $3,000, and I want that in writing that you take full responsibility for any legal consequences." "Deal." Saturday, I spent the day doing reconnaissance. I drove past Brenda's house 5 times, noting the sight lines, the street lights, the neighbors' window positions. Her house sat on a corner lot, which was good. Less chance of being blocked in. The front yard was big enough to accommodate the mailbox cluster, and there was even a bare patch of dirt near her driveway that looked perfect. I also visited the county recorder's office and made copies of every relevant document. The HOA bylaws, the CC and Articus, the meeting minutes that showed the mailbox decision, and most importantly, the certified mail log that should have shown my notice being sent. That log had 17 addresses listed for notification. Mine wasn't among them. Armed with that ammunition, I felt a lot better about what I was planning to do. Sunday morning, 2:15, Derek showed up with his flatbed truck, a small excavator on a trailer, and his cousin Miguel, who apparently owed Derek money and was working it off. They both wore dark clothes and looked like they were preparing for a heist. "This is the stupidest thing I've ever done," Derek said, but he was grinning. The mailbox cluster wasn't fully secured yet because USPs hadn't done their final inspection. The construction crew had left it bolted to the concrete pad, but the pad itself wasn't anchored deep. It took Miguel about 20 minutes with the excavator to dig around the pad and create enough space to slip chains underneath. We worked quietly, or as quietly as you can work with heavy equipment at 2 in the morning. A few lights flicked on in neighboring houses, but nobody came outside. Phoenix gets hot, and most people sleep with their windows closed and air conditioning running. Sound doesn't travel as well as you'd think. Getting the mailbox cluster onto the flatbed was the hard part. The whole assembly weighed maybe 800 pounds, and we had to balance it carefully to avoid tipping the truck. Derek's excavator did most of the heavy lifting, literally, while Miguel and I guided it with ropes. By 3 in the morning, we were driving through empty Phoenix streets with a stolen mailbox cluster. I say stolen, but technically it was HOA community property, and I was a member of the community, so really I was just relocating a shared asset. That's what I told myself anyway. Brenda's house looked peaceful in the darkness, all her pretentious landscape lighting casting soft glows on her decorative rocks and imported palm trees. The fountain burbled quietly. Her Mercedes sat in the driveway like a silver status symbol. "You're really doing this," Derek said. "I'm really doing this." We pulled up as quietly as possible, though the diesel engine on the excavator wasn't exactly subtle. I'd thought this through, though. We weren't trying to be completely invisible. We just needed to be fast enough that nobody could stop us before we finished. Miguel jumped off the truck and scouted the front yard. The bare patch I'd noticed was even better up close, right next to the driveway where everyone coming or going would have to see it. Perfect. Derek fired up the excavator and started digging while Miguel and I prepped the mailbox cluster. We'd brought quick-set concrete, the kind that hardens in an hour. This wasn't going to be a temporary installation. I was spreading concrete in the hole when lights flicked on inside Brenda's house. A bedroom window on the second floor glowed yellow. "Move faster," I hissed. Derek lowered the mailbox cluster into position. It landed with a heavy thunk that probably woke up half the neighborhood. Miguel and I shoveled concrete around the base, working like maniacs, while Derek repositioned the excavator to pack dirt around the edges. The front door flew open. Brenda stood there in a purple bathrobe, her hair in curlers, face cream smeared on her cheeks. For a second, she just stared, her brain clearly not processing what she was seeing. "What are you doing?" she finally shrieked. "Installing a mailbox cluster," I said calmly, smoothing concrete. "For the community, you're welcome." "That's not. You can't. This is my property." Actually, according to page 47 of the CC and Articus, the HOA has easement rights for community postal facilities. I'm just exercising those rights. Your location is centrally located and perfect for the neighborhood's needs. Her face went from pale to red in about 2 seconds. "Remove it immediately." "Can't do that. Work order's already approved. You stop me now and you'll be charged for the delay." I was quoting the construction foreman almost word for word. "I'll call the police." "Go ahead. I've got all the documentation showing that you installed community property on my land without proper notice. I'm just relocating it to a more appropriate location." The HOA board approved mailbox clusters, right? Well, here's a mailbox cluster. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind her, a man appeared in the doorway. Her husband, I assumed. He took one look at the situation and went back inside. Smart guy. "We'll see what the police have to say about this," Brenda spat, pulling out her phone. Great. I'll wait right here. Miguel finished packing the last of the dirt while Derek loaded the excavator back onto his trailer. The whole operation had taken maybe 35 minutes. The mailbox cluster now sat firmly in Brenda's front yard, concrete hardening around its base, looking just as industrial and ugly as it had looked in mine. Neighbors were coming outside now, drawn by the noise and commotion. I recognized Tom and Sandra from 3 houses down and the Martinez family from across the street. They stood on their porches in pajamas and robes, watching the show. 2 Phoenix PD cruisers arrived within 10 minutes, lights flashing but sirens off. The officers looked tired and annoyed, probably because they had better things to do at 3:30 on a Sunday morning than deal with HOA drama. "Someone want to explain what's going on here," the first officer said. He was young, maybe late 20s, with that fresh-faced look that suggested he hadn't been beaten down by the job yet. Brenda launched into a hysterical explanation about how I'd vandalized her property and illegally installed a massive metal structure on her lawn. She kept using words like criminal, trespassing, and destruction of property. When she finally ran out of steam, the officer turned to me. "Your side." I pulled out my folder of documents. "Here's the HOA bylaws showing easement rights for community postal facilities. Here's the meeting minutes where the board, led by Mrs. Jennings, voted to install a mailbox cluster using those easement rights. Here's the work order for installation at my property. And here," I held up the certified mail log, "is proof that they never provided the required 30-day notice to my address." The officer took the documents and spent several minutes reading through them with his flashlight. His partner, an older woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, examined the mailbox cluster and took notes. "So let me get this straight," the younger officer said. "The HOA installed this thing on your property without proper notice, so you moved it to the HOA president's property, correct? Community property should be in a location that serves the community. Mrs. Jennings's corner lot has excellent visibility and access." "This is insane," Brenda shrieked. "He can't just move whatever he wants onto my property." "With respect, madam," I said, "you did exactly that to me 3 days ago. I'm just following the precedent you established." The older officer suppressed what might have been a smile. "This is a civil matter. You'll need to work this out through your HOA board or take it to court." "But he damaged my landscaping." Brenda pointed at some disturbed dirt around the mailbox cluster. "Did the construction crew that installed the original cluster damage my landscaping?" I pulled out photos on my phone showing my torn-up lawn and damaged tree roots. "Because I have extensive documentation of that." The younger officer handed back my documents. "Like my partner said, this is civil. File a complaint with your HOA board or contact a lawyer. We can't force anyone to move anything without a court order. So he just gets away with this." Brenda's voice had gone shrill. "Take it up with your lawyer, madam." The officers returned to their cruisers and drove off, probably grateful to escape the drama. Brenda turned to me, her face twisted with rage. "You have no idea what you've just done. The board will fine you into oblivion. We'll place a lien on your house. We'll make your life miserable." "Looking forward to it," I said. "See you at the next board meeting." Derek, Miguel, and I packed up our equipment and left. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was Brenda standing in her driveway, staring at her new mailbox cluster, illuminated by her landscape lighting like some kind of modern art installation. I slept better that night than I had in months. Monday morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls and 23 emails from the HOA. All of them were from Brenda, each one more unhinged than the last. The emails ranged from formal legal threats to barely coherent rants about respect and community standards. The voicemails were even better, progressing from coldly professional to shrieking fury. I forwarded everything to my email folder labeled HOA Insanity and went to work. I'm a software engineer for a medical device company in Temp, and normally, I love my job. But that day I couldn't focus on code. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the next development. Around 11, I got a text from Tom, my neighbor who'd watched the Sunday morning show. "Dude, you're a legend. Everyone's talking about it. Brenda's losing her mind." I texted back, "Just exercising my HOA rights. Board meeting emergency session called for Wednesday night. You coming? Wouldn't miss it." Tuesday morning brought a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. The law firm was Henderson, Walsh, and Associates, one of those generic outfits that probably made half their money from HOA disputes. The letter demanded I remove the mailbox cluster from Brenda's property within 72 hours or face fines of $500 per day, plus legal fees. I scanned the letter and emailed it to every homeowner in Sunset Ridge Estates whose email I could find. I'd been collecting addresses over the years, mostly from neighborhood barbecues and school events. I had about 60 in my contacts. My email was simple. The HOA board installed community property on my lawn without required notice. When I relocated it to a more appropriate location, they threatened me with fines and legal action. Attached are documents showing they violated their own bylaws. This affects all of us. See you Wednesday at the emergency meeting. By Tuesday afternoon, my inbox was flooded with responses. Most people supported me. They dealt with Brenda's heavy-handed management style for years and were thrilled someone had finally pushed back. A few people thought I'd gone too far, but they were in the minority. Wednesday evening, I showed up to the board meeting 30 minutes early. The meetings were held in the community center, a squat brick building with a parking lot that was usually empty except for the occasional youth basketball game. Tonight, the parking lot was packed. I'd expected maybe 20 people to show up. There had to be at least 80 homeowners crammed into the meeting room, with more standing in the hallway outside. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat, and conversations buzzed with an energy I'd never seen at an HOA meeting before. Brenda sat at the front table with the other board members. Richard, the vice president who never spoke, Teresa, the treasurer who always looked stressed, and Gary, the secretary who spent most meetings playing on his phone. They all looked uncomfortable with the turnout. Brenda banged her gavel at 7 sharp. "This emergency session is called to order. We're here to address the illegal actions of Adam O'Brien, who vandalized the HOA president's property and installed an unapproved structure. Point of order," I called out, standing up. "The structure was approved by this board. I have the meeting minutes. You voted to install mailbox clusters using HOA easement rights. I simply relocated the one you illegally placed on my property." The room erupted in conversation. Brenda banged her gavel repeatedly. "You had no authority to move HOA property. You had no authority to place it on my property without proper notice. Show me the certified mail receipt proving I was notified." Brenda's face flushed. "The notice was sent. If you didn't receive it, that's not our problem." I pulled out my folder and walked to the front of the room. I visited the county recorder's office. According to the certified mail log filed with the county, 17 properties were notified about the mailbox cluster installation. My address isn't on that list. That's a violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and Articles, which requires 30-day written notice to all affected homeowners. I handed copies to each board member. Teresa, the treasurer, studied hers and went pale. Additionally, I continued, the bylaws require that any use of easement rights must be done in good faith compliance with notification requirements. Since you failed to notify me, the easement is invalid and the installation on my property was illegal. This is ridiculous, Brenda said. We're the board. We make decisions for the community. No, you make decisions for yourselves, a voice called out from the crowd. It was Tom, my neighbor. We've been dealing with your petty tyranny for 6 years, Brenda. Most of us are just here to watch you get what you deserve. Applause and cheers filled the room. Brenda looked shocked, like she couldn't comprehend that her reign might actually be challenged. Order, she shouted, banging the gavel so hard I thought it might break. We will have order. Gary, the secretary, leaned over and whispered something to Brenda. Her expression shifted from angry to worried. Let's take a 10-minute recess, she announced abruptly. The board members huddled in a corner while the crowd buzzed with speculation. I stood near the back, accepting congratulations and fist bumps from neighbors I barely knew. A woman named Patricia, who lived on the other side of the development, grabbed my arm. Thank you for this, she said. 3 years ago, Brenda fined me $8,000 because my fence was 6 inches too tall according to some rule she found buried in the bylaws. She's been a nightmare. Others shared similar stories. The HOA board, led by Brenda, had been wielding their limited power like dictators, finding obscure violations and imposing hefty fines for minor infractions. People paid because they didn't know they could fight back, or because the cost of fighting exceeded the fines. When the meeting resumed, Brenda looked like she'd eaten something sour. After consulting with the board, she said stiffly, we've decided to table the issue of the mailbox cluster location pending a full review of the installation procedures. In the meantime, we're proposing that the cluster be moved to the community park, pending county approval. So you're admitting you screwed up, someone yelled. Brenda's jaw clenched. We're acknowledging that there may have been a procedural oversight. Will you be reimbursing Adam for the damage to his property? Tom asked. That will be determined as part of the review process. What about all the other bogus fines you've issued? Patricia stood up. Are we reviewing those too? The room erupted again. People started shouting about their own experiences, their own unfair fines, their own problems with the board. Brenda tried to regain control, but the gavel was useless against the tide of anger. Finally, Richard, the vice president, stood up. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who I'd never heard speak in a meeting before. I move that we hold a special election for all board positions within 60 days, Richard said. His voice was quiet but steady. Clearly, we've lost the confidence of the homeowners. The room went silent. Brenda stared at Richard like he'd betrayed her. You can't do that, she said. Actually, I can. Article 12 of the bylaws allows for special elections if requested by a board member and supported by a petition of 25% of homeowners. I'm formally requesting that election. I'll sign that petition, I said immediately. Me too, Tom added. Within minutes, people were lining up to add their names. Teresa, looking relieved, provided paper and pens. We needed signatures from 34 homeowners. We got 72. Brenda sat frozen at the front table, watching her kingdom crumble. When the petition was complete and handed to Richard, she stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. She walked out without another word. The room erupted in cheers. People congratulated each other like we'd won something significant, and maybe we had. For the first time in years, the homeowners had pushed back against an overreaching HOA board. But I knew Brenda wouldn't go quietly. Thursday morning, I woke up to find my car tires slashed. All 4 of them, neat cuts that would require complete replacement. I called the police and filed a report, though I had no proof who done it. The officer who took my statement seemed sympathetic, but said vandalism cases were hard to solve without witnesses or camera footage. I mentioned the HOA situation, and he wrote that down, but I could tell he thought I was reaching. Still, I documented everything with photos and added it to my growing file. That afternoon, Derek called me. "Hey man, did you know there's a code enforcement complaint filed against your business? Someone reported that you're running commercial operations from a residential property." "What? I work from home sometimes, but that's just remote work for my regular job." "Yeah, well, someone reported you've got multiple vehicles coming and going at odd hours, conducting business. Code enforcement is asking questions." I knew exactly who had filed that complaint. Code enforcement took reports seriously, even bullshit ones, and investigating them cost the county money. If they found the complaint was false, they could find the person who filed it, but that rarely happened. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll deal with it." Over the next week, I received 3 more violations from the HOA. My grass was allegedly too long, even though I'd mowed it 3 days ago. My garbage cans were visible from the street between the hours of 3 and 5 p.m. On a Tuesday, violating some obscure rule about container visibility. And my mailbox, the old one that was now obsolete because of the cluster system, was the wrong shade of black. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a threat of increasing penalties if not resolved within 7 days. It was clear harassment, and it was equally clear that Brenda was behind it. I documented everything, photographed my grass height against the HOA standards, showed my garbage cans were only visible because I'd been loading my car to go to the dump, and proved my mailbox matched the approved color specifications from the original HOA welcome packet. Then I filed a formal complaint against Brenda Jennings with the HOABoard, alleging harassment and abuse of authority. I included all the violations, the timeline showing they started immediately after the board meeting, and communications from other homeowners experiencing similar retaliation. Richard, now acting as interim president after Brenda essentially stopped participating, took my complaint seriously. He called an executive session of the board, and I was invited to present my case. The meeting was held on a Saturday morning. Only Richard, Teresa, and Gary attended. Brenda was notably absent, though she'd been invited. "She's not responding to board communications," Richard explained. "At this point, we're considering her to have abandoned her position." I presented my evidence, including the slashed tires, the bogus code enforcement complaint, and the retaliatory HOA violations. Teresa looked increasingly disturbed as I went through the timeline. "This is beyond unacceptable," she said. "We could be held personally liable if this is proven to be board-sanctioned harassment." "It's not board-sanctioned," Richard said firmly. "It's Brenda acting on her own. The question is what we do about it." "Remove her from the board immediately," Gary said, finally looking up from his phone, "before she does more damage." They voted unanimously to remove Brenda as president and suspend her from the board pending the special election. Richard assumed the presidency temporarily, and they agreed to refund all the bogus fines and issue a formal apology. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday night, I was watching TV when I heard a crash from my garage. I jumped up and ran to investigate, flipping on the lights. The small window on my garage door was shattered, glass scattered across the concrete floor. A brick sat among the debris with a note rubber banded around it. I didn't touch anything. I called the police immediately. The same older female officer from the mailbox incident responded. She examined the scene, photographed everything, and carefully removed the note with gloved hands. "You should read this," she said, holding it up for me to see. The note was printed on plain paper. "Remove the mailbox or your property gets worse. This is your only warning." "I'm guessing this relates to your HOA situation," the officer said. "Brenda Jennings. Has to be. Can you prove that?" "No, but the timing is pretty obvious. She just got removed from the HOA board last week." The officer bagged the evidence. "We'll investigate, but these cases are tough without witnesses. You should consider installing security cameras. Already on my list." I spent the next day installing a comprehensive camera system. 4 cameras covering every angle of my house, all connected to cloud storage so footage couldn't be tampered with. The system cost me $1,200, but it was worth it. I also filed for a restraining order against Brenda, citing the pattern of harassment. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. Meanwhile, the special election was heating up. Richard was running for president on a reform platform. A woman named Caroline Singh, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, was running for vice president. People I'd never seen at HOA meetings before were suddenly interested in governance. Brenda announced she was running for re-election as president. Her campaign consisted mainly of posting on the neighborhood Facebook page about how I was a troublemaker who disrupted the community's peace. Most people weren't buying it. The mailbox cluster, still sitting in Brenda's front yard, had become a tourist attraction of sorts. Neighbors would walk by to see it, take photos, and laugh about the situation. Brenda had tried to hire contractors to remove it, but I'd filed a temporary injunction arguing that it was community property and couldn't be moved without a board vote. The judge, apparently amused by the whole situation, granted the injunction until the election was over. My restraining order hearing came on a Thursday. I showed up with my folder of evidence, now inches thick. Brenda arrived with her lawyer from Henderson, Walsh, and Associates, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s who looked annoyed to be there. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Alvarez. She had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, which worked in my favor. I presented my case: the retaliatory violations, the slashed tires, the code enforcement complaint, and the brick through my window. I showed the timeline, the pattern, and the notes. Brenda's lawyer argued that I had no proof his client was responsible for any of it. The violations were legitimate enforcement of HOA rules. The criminal acts could have been done by anyone. I was trying to harass his client because of a personal vendetta. Judge Alvarez listened to both sides, then asked Brenda directly, "Mrs. Jennings, did you file a code enforcement complaint against Mr. O'Brien?" Brenda hesitated. "I may have. If I did, it was because I observed violations." "Did you slash his tires?" "Of course not. That's absurd." "Did you throw a brick through his window?" "No." The judge turned to me. "Mr. O'Brien, I appreciate your thoroughness in documenting these incidents. However, without direct evidence linking Mrs. Jennings to the criminal acts, I can't issue a restraining order based on speculation. The HOA violations appear to have been resolved by the current board. If you experience further criminal vandalism, document it and report it to police. If you can provide evidence linking Mrs. Jennings to those acts, come back and I'll reconsider." It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it wasn't a complete loss either. The judge had clearly seen through Brenda's act, even if she couldn't rule against her without proof. The election was held 3 days later. The turnout was unprecedented for an HOA vote. Over 200 homeowners showed up or submitted proxies, nearly 90% of the neighborhood. Richard won the presidency with 73% of the vote. Caroline won vice president. Tom, my neighbor, won secretary. A retired accountant named James won treasurer. Every single board position went to reform candidates. Brenda received 37 votes, all from her immediate friends and the few neighbors who still supported her. When the results were announced at the community center, she stood up and walked out without a word. The new board's first action was to vote on the Mailbox cluster location. After reviewing the options, they decided to install it in the community park. The county had fast-tracked approval after Richard explained the situation, apparently finding the whole thing entertaining. A professional crew removed the cluster from Brenda's yard and reinstalled it in a nice location near the park entrance, with proper landscaping and lighting. They also repaired my yard, replaced my damaged Japanese maple with a larger one, and reimbursed me for my security camera system. The old HOA attorney, Henderson, Walsh, and Associates, was fired and replaced with a firm that specialized in helping HOAs comply with the law rather than bully residents. Over the next few months, the new board systematically reviewed every fine issued over the past 3 years. They reversed dozens of them, refunding nearly $100,000 to homeowners who'd been unfairly penalized. They also revised the CC and Articus to remove the most ridiculous rules and establish clear appeal processes. Brenda mostly disappeared from neighborhood life. She stopped attending board meetings, stopped posting on Facebook, and rarely left her house. Her husband filed for divorce in June, citing irreconcilable differences. The word around the neighborhood was that he'd been done with her controlling behavior for years, and the HOA drama was the final straw. I thought the story was over. Then, in late July, my security cameras caught something interesting. It was 2 in the morning on a Wednesday. I was asleep when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I groggily checked the app and saw a figure dressed in dark clothes approaching my house from the side yard. I watched in real time as the person walked up to my front window carrying what looked like a paint sprayer. They started to spray something on my window, and I immediately called the police while recording everything. The person was mid-spray when Phoenix PD rolled up with lights and sirens. They dropped the sprayer and tried to run, but the officer was faster. Within 30 seconds, they were in handcuffs. The officer walked the suspect to the front of my house where my camera had a clear view. They pulled back the hood of the dark sweatshirt. Brenda Jennings looked directly at my camera, her face twisted with rage and something else. Desperation, maybe. Or just exhaustion from carrying all that anger. I went outside in my pajamas and provided the officer with my phone showing the real-time footage. Other officers examined the spray paint, which spelled out "try" before Brenda was interrupted. Presumably, she was going for traitor or something similar. "Madam, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and property damage," the officer said. "He destroyed my life," Brenda screamed. "He took everything from me. He deserves this." "You destroyed your own life by abusing your position," I said calmly. "I just held you accountable." The officer loaded Brenda into the back of the cruiser while his partner took my statement. They seized the spray paint as evidence and gave me a case number for my insurance claim. "You'll need to appear in court when this goes to trial," the officer explained. "Given that this is part of a documented pattern of harassment, the prosecutor will probably take it seriously." Brenda was charged with criminal trespassing, criminal damage, and stalking based on the pattern of behavior. The security footage was damning, showing clear intent. Her lawyer tried to argue she was having a mental health crisis, but the prosecutor wasn't sympathetic. The case went to court in September. I testified about the entire saga, from the mailbox cluster installation through all the harassment to the final late-night spray paint attempt. My documentation, photos, recordings, and security footage created an irrefutable timeline. Brenda's lawyer tried to paint me as a vigilante who'd provoked his client, but the judge wasn't having it. Judge Alvarez, the same judge from the restraining order hearing, was assigned to the case. Mrs. Jennings, Judge Alvarez said during sentencing, you were given a position of limited authority in your community, and you abused that authority repeatedly. When you were held accountable, rather than accept the consequences, you escalated to criminal behavior. This court takes that very seriously. Brenda was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, suspended to 2 years probation, with mandatory anger management counseling and community service. She was also ordered to pay restitution for all my damages, including the tires, the window, and the security system. Most importantly, she was barred from holding any HOA position for 10 years and prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not vindication or victory, just simple peace. Life in Sunset Ridge Estates improved dramatically under the new board. They held quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns. They established reasonable standards for violations and created a fair appeals process. They even organized neighborhood events, including a 4th of July barbecue that brought everyone together. The mailbox cluster in the park worked perfectly, and people actually appreciated the central location. The landscaping around it won a Neighborhood Beautification Award from the city. Tom and I became close friends through the whole experience. We started a tradition of meeting every Sunday morning for coffee, sitting on my repaired front lawn in the shade of my new Japanese maple tree. You know what's funny? Tom said one Sunday in October. That mailbox thing started as Brenda trying to show her power, and it ended up being the thing that freed us all from her. Sometimes the things people do to control others end up being exactly what breaks their control, I said. My daughter came to visit that weekend, the first time since the whole HOA drama started. She was in college at University of Arizona now, studying environmental science. I showed her the new tree, and she laughed when I told her the whole story. Dad, you moved a mailbox cluster to someone's front yard in the middle of the night. That's insane. It was actually kind of therapeutic. Most people just hire lawyers. Where's the fun in that? We planted some new flowers together around the tree, making the front yard look better than it had in years. As we worked, neighbors walked by and waved, stopping to chat, creating the kind of community that Brenda had always claimed to want but had never actually fostered. Patricia, the woman who'd been fined for her fence, came by with homemade cookies. Derek stopped by to check on the tree he'd helped relocate. Even Richard came by to thank me for standing up to Brenda, saying it had inspired him to get more involved in community governance. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up to petty tyrants. They rely on people being afraid to fight back, on the assumption that the cost of resistance exceeds the cost of compliance. But sometimes, resistance isn't about the money or the rules or even winning. Sometimes it's about refusing to accept that someone else gets to make decisions about your property, your life, your peace of mind. Would I recommend moving a mailbox cluster to your HOA president's front yard? Probably not. It was risky, potentially illegal, and could have gone very wrong. But it worked because Brenda had overreached so badly, broken so many of her own rules, and alienated so many people that when I pushed back, the community was ready to push with me. The incident became something of a local legend. I started getting emails from people in other neighborhoods dealing with their own HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I couldn't help most of them, but I always said the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up when someone abuses their authority. Some of those people formed their own reform movements in their neighborhoods. I heard stories about successful board recalls, revised bylaws, and communities reclaiming power from petty dictators. My mailbox cluster became a symbol of sorts, proof that you could fight back and win. A local news station even did a story about it, a light-hearted piece about HOA disputes that featured interviews with me, Richard, and several other homeowners. They tried to interview Brenda, but she refused. The segment ended with a shot of the mailbox cluster in its final location at the park, with the reporter joking that sometimes mail needs to find its proper home. As December rolled around, the neighborhood looked different. People had their Christmas decorations up, and there were no violation notices about improper lighting or excessive inflatable Santas. The new board had simplified the holiday decoration rules to basically, don't be obnoxious, which worked fine. I put up lights on my house, more than I dared to use in years, creating a display that my daughter said looked like Christmas threw up on our house. I took that as a compliment. On Christmas Eve, there was a neighborhood caroling event organized by Caroline, the new vice president. About 40 people showed up, walking through the streets singing off key renditions of classic carols. When we passed Brenda's house, dark and silent with a for sale sign in the yard, nobody said anything. We just kept walking, kept singing. I heard later that Brenda moved to Nevada to live with her sister. The house sold in January to a young family with 3 kids who immediately became active in neighborhood events. They knew nothing about the previous drama, which was probably for the best. In March, the county sent a formal letter thanking the HOA for its cooperation in resolving the mailbox cluster dispute and commending the community for its civic engagement. Richard framed it and hung it in the community center, next to the Neighborhood Beautification Award. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was good. My daughter visited regularly. The Japanese maple tree grew strong and healthy, its branches spreading wider each season. The front yard looked beautiful, no mailbox cluster in sight, just grass and flowers and space. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that Sunday morning at 2 a.m., driving through Phoenix with a stolen mailbox cluster on Derek's flatbed truck. The sheer insanity of it, the risk, the adrenaline. Part of me couldn't believe I'd actually done it. But then I'd remember Brenda's face when she opened her door and saw what we were doing. The shock, the outrage, the dawning realization that her authority wasn't absolute, that someone had finally called her bluff. That memory made it all worthwhile. Derek and I still laughed about it over beers. Miguel had dined out on the story for months, telling everyone about the crazy night he helped move a mailbox cluster. It had become his favorite anecdote at parties. "You know the wildest part," Derek said one evening as we sat on his patio. "Everything we did was technically legal. Barely, but legal. That's why documentation matters. Know the rules better than the people trying to use them against you. Still the craziest thing I've ever helped with. Worth the $3,000, hell yes. Best money I ever made." The new HOA board continued to function smoothly through the year. They dealt with normal community issues like road repairs and common area maintenance without drama or power trips. People actually started attending board meetings again because they were useful rather than contentious. At the annual meeting in November, Richard gave a report on the year's activities. He mentioned the mailbox cluster saga briefly, noting that it had catalyzed important reforms in community governance. People applauded, and a few laughed, remembering. "We've learned that effective community management requires trust," Richard said. "Trust between the board and homeowners. Trust that rules will be applied fairly. Trust that everyone's voice matters. We lost that trust for a while, but we're building it back." More applause. I sat in the back, not wanting attention, just glad that things had worked out. Afterward, Patricia approached me. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "What you did inspired all of us to stand up for ourselves. The board refunded my fence fine, you know. $8,000 I never thought I'd see again. I'm glad it helped. It did more than help. It changed this neighborhood." As I drove home that night, I thought about power and how it works. Brenda had wanted power over others, control and authority she could wield to feel important. But real power, the kind that actually matters, comes from standing together with other people, from refusing to accept that authority gives someone the right to abuse you. The Mailbox cluster sits in the park now, serving its actual purpose, holding mail for 30 families without drama or controversy. It's just a metal box on a concrete pad, nothing special. But every time I pick up my mail, I remember what it represents. Proof that you don't have to accept someone else's idea of how things should be, especially when they're wrong. My front lawn looks perfect now. The grass is green and healthy, maintained to reasonable standards I set for myself rather than arbitrary rules from an HOA board. The Japanese maple provides shade on hot Phoenix afternoons. Flowers bloom in careful beds my daughter and I plan together. There's no mailbox cluster, no torn-up dirt, no damaged tree roots. Just my property, managed my way, with nobody trying to install their projects on my land without permission. And every night, my security cameras record peaceful darkness. No middle-aged women in hoodies spray painting my windows, no bricks through glass, no slashed tires. Just the quiet safety of a neighborhood that learned to govern itself with respect instead of fear. The whole experience, from that first Thursday morning discovering construction equipment on my lawn to Brenda's sentencing in court, took about 9 months. 9 months of documentation, confrontation, legal maneuvering, and occasional late-night mailbox cluster relocation. 9 months that changed how I think about community, authority, and the importance of standing up for yourself. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I recommend others do the same? Only if they're prepared for the fight, have good documentation, and know their rights. Standing up to an HOA board isn't easy, and it doesn't always work out well. But sometimes, when the board has gone too far, when someone has abused their limited authority for too long, when nobody else is willing to push back, someone has to be willing to load a mailbox cluster onto a flatbed truck at 2 in the morning and relocate it to where it really belongs. That someone was me, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat.